What is up, guys? It's the Sound Alchemist, part of One Mind Syndicate, and today I'm back to talk about Warhammer 40K. In this one, we have a request from one of our viewers to read an excerpt from the Master's Bidding that talks about the Word Bearers taking over a world that used to be held by the Tau Empire. So this one doesn't have much action, but it does showcase what exactly happens when chaos takes over a world, be it Imperial or Xenos. So without further ado, let's dive right in. How wretched was the furthest world in the Aol cluster when we came upon it. Tertia had been a world of humanity since the ages before our memory, paying tribute to the Great Crusade and its self-proclaimed emperor. But the shadow of the Imperium waned over the millennia. The grip of dead faith of the Aquila began to slip. Aol became fickle. One of its worlds fell to the lure of the four-armed marauders, heralding the hive fleets, and only then did the Imperium show a face in the system to stamp out the infection. But they won no love from Aol by it, and before long, Aolterria was in open secession to seek shelter in the fold of yet more Xenos, the ambitious and striving Tau, who seek not to expunge other races, but to subjugate and regime them under the greater good in whose name they claim to rule. However, Lorgar tells us that the strong hand cannot be directed by the clouded eye, and as you shall see, the eyes of the Tau are clouded indeed. Their viceroys promised a just and firm rule, rather than the capricious and neglectful Imperium. But having taken the reins at Aol, the creatures could not hold them. The Tau do not understand the warp touch in the way that humans can. They cannot feel the currents of the God Sea and respond to it. They can never share our relationship to the primal. And thus blind, they know not how to govern once a new generation began to grow on the world they had freed for themselves to rule. The children grew. Their children grew. The numbers of psychers grew, and the Tau would not understand what was happening. They scoffed at the imperial traditions as witch myths peddled by imperial confessors to foment anger and weaken the flock for more effective control. And so the warp touch spilled out upon Aolterria. Lorgar tells us that the gifts of the God Sea must never slip the traces of understanding, and when we saw the fate of Aol, we gave praise to the Primarch's word. Here was a world caught between two masters, slipping free of the Xeno leash, but not yet back beneath the shadow of the Aquila. A world ready for a deeper, grander, truly godly alliance. When we overflew the broad land that rode high against the planet's polar circle like a pauldron on a shoulder, we found the frost-dusted shingle plains, crisscrossed with rail tracks and pocket with mass diver silos. When Aol had been in its prime, the Tau had loaded shells full of Aol's silica sands and rich biocultures, and blasted them into the orbit for their freighters to snare and drag back to their own worlds. After the Tau quit the system, bands of human came fleeing from the bloodshed further south and turned stripped silo compounds into refuges. Some still held out, some were abandoned, some had become home to psyker children and become charnel houses, or even worse. Two of Aol's continents stranded the equator. The first was a jagged, dislocated thing split by two tectonic seams, knuckled with mountains and restless with earthquakes and lava. The humans here were base creatures of no dignity, who scavenged the rubble of Tau-built cities. In the winters they formed great caravans, traveling to sell their salvages to the surviving cities along the temperature coast. The scavengers prized their psyker children highly, and willingly took the risks of raising them in order to make them weapons against their rivals. The second continent was low and flat, and stippled with seas and forests where survivors lived and warred. A belief had sprung up that there were psyker resurgences all over the world because the Tau had fled it, but not the reverse. And so they had turned the old Tau sand mining rigs in the shallow inland seas into holy places. Here they would congregate according to ceremonial calendars, ritually hang those they suspected of psykerhood, and perform acts of worship to abandoned Tau artifacts, pleading for their old Xeno masters to return and deliver them. Between the Great Lakes, the rest of the old citizens had taken their loyalty in the other direction, hailing the emergent psychers as their saviors, reaching back for old scraps of memory of the imperial faith to weave sanctiful stories of saints and angels around the mad and possessed creatures whom they made their kings and prophets. It was the last continent, and among its serried islands and basalt reefs, where madness had truly incarnated. Here was where the Tau had laid down their quarantine camps for what they thought was madness and rebellion, exiling here the first psychers to rise among their subjects as they strove to stay ascendant. By the time we landed here, the black cliffs and the lichen groves had become playgrounds to the warp-touched at their maddest and most free. When we stepped from our land raider, we were greeted by a flayed torso and a head that walked towards us on spider legs made of lightning, calling our names. Behind it crawled a thing made of 4 human bodies that wriggled along on a tangle of limbs and turned the ground as it passed over it to bleeding flesh. But Lorgar tells us that some powers are given to us to be pupils, to some we are destined to be soldiers, and to others we know ourselves to be their masters. And over some we must understand that we are stewards. So I had surmised to my brothers before we landed to resolve them upon our mission. We were here as stewards, as builders, as marshals and generals, and the folk of Aolterria, awoken to their grandeur of chaos, were to us as children now, as pupils given us to guide. So with that being said, guys, this was the short excerpt that shows you just what exactly happens when the Tau try to basically terraform and control a planet of psychers. We see that humanity here kind of split off into 3 different ideologies, one that prays to their Tau captors, one that also prays to the Imperium, and one that was just free and fully enraptured with their own psychic abilities. What they don't tell us here is what exactly happened after the word bearers took control of this planet. This is a slightly different version of the word bearers we know. They're not fully chaotic, as we can see here that they are trying to subjugate this planet under their will, but it is interesting to think about all this world building in the 40K universe. Usually when we talk about 40K, it revolves around fights, who's the better warrior, who can punch the hardest. And here we see what exactly happens after these fights are done and these worlds become subjugated by their oppressors, be it Xeno or Imperial control. So if you guys like this type of world building lore, let me know what other types of worlds you want to learn about, or maybe if you want to see what exactly happens during the Great Crusade era as humanity was becoming subjugated by the Imperial Creed. But that's all I got for today, guys. So thanks again for watching, listening, commenting, sharing, and subscribing. And as always, I've been the Sound Alchemist, part of One Mind Syndicate, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.
Always used to put my freedom first.